The first time I kissed a woman, the world didn't make sense anymore. It wasn't soft or gentle. It was a collision. It was months of heated arguments and furious glances igniting in a single, shocking moment in a cold parking garage. Her mouth was on mine, and she wasn't my enemy anymore. She was the answer to a question I was too afraid to ask. And as I was learning the taste of jasmine and forgiveness, my daughter was learning the taste of mint tea and gentle hands, falling in love with a smile that felt like coming home. This is the true story of a mother and a daughter, both discovering the life-altering power of a woman's kiss at the same time. It's about the terrifying, beautiful freefall into a love that was forbidden, and the incredible family we built once we finally landed. Hit subscribe. The weight of her touch. The scent of Julia's perfume, something dark and expensive, like oud wood and night-blooming jasmine, always hit Beatrice first. It would seep under the door of her algebra classroom, a fragrant harbinger of doom. Then would come the crisp click of heels on linoleum, a sound that made Beatrice's jaw clench so tight she feared for her molars. It was a Tuesday, the most mundane of days, when the world decided to tilt on its axis. Beatrice was pinning a student's meticulously drawn graph of quadratic equations to the bulletin board when that scent washed over her. Ms. Conti. A word. Beatrice turned, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. Julia Rossi stood in her doorway, a vision in a tailored charcoal pantsuit that probably cost more than Beatrice's monthly rent. Her dark hair was swept into a severe but elegant chignon, not a strand out of place. She was the president of the school's parent board, a formidable philanthropist, and, in Beatrice's opinion, a professional nitpicker. Mrs. Rossi. To what do I owe the pleasure? Beatrice's voice was tighter than she intended. Julia glided into the room, her eyes doing a quick, dismissive sweep of the posters of famous mathematicians. It's about Rowan's last exam. Rowan. Julia's daughter. A quiet, fiercely intelligent girl in Beatrice's class who possessed none of her mother's abrasive confidence and all of her intensity, turned inward. He got a B+, Beatrice said, crossing her arms. It's a good grade. He showed his work, but he made a minor error in the final calculation. A minor error, Julia repeated, her tone implying Beatrice had just confessed to teaching alchemy instead of algebra. Rowan is applying to Stanford. MIT. Caltech. They don't see B+. They see not an A. They see imperfect. He's 17. He's allowed to be imperfect. It's how we learn. Julia took a step closer. The jasmine and oud cloud enveloped Beatrice, unsettlingly intimate. What he needs to learn is precision. What he needs is a teacher who doesn't dismiss a dropped negative sign as a minor error. The air crackled. It always did with them. A relentless, exhausting current of mutual disdain. Beatrice saw a woman who believed her wealth and status could bend the world to her will, including the grading curve of a high school math class. Julia saw a dowdy, idealistic teacher who didn't understand the realities of ambition. The grade stands, Mrs. Rossi, Beatrice said, her voice low. Julia's eyes, a startling shade of hazel that seemed to shift from green to gold, narrowed. We'll see about that. She turned on her heel and left, the scent of her lingering like a challenge. Beatrice slumped against the bulletin board, her heart hammering. She hated how Julia Rossi could make her feel so flustered, so seen and judged in the worst possible way. It was just a grade. But with Julia, it never was. That same evening, across town, Rowan Rossi was trying to become invisible. She was at dinner with her boyfriend, Leo, and his mother, Marin. The restaurant was all soft lighting and murmuring voices, the kind of place where the silverware felt heavier than her textbooks. Leo was talking animatedly about a new video game, his hand resting comfortably on her knee under the table. Rowan nodded in the right places, but her attention was snagged, utterly and completely, by Marin. Marin was the polar opposite of Julia. Where Rowan's mother was sharp angles and polished surfaces, Marin was all soft curves and warm textures. She had kind eyes the color of sea glass and a laugh that felt like a sunbeam. She wore a simple, cream-colored sweater, and a single silver pendant rested in the hollow of her throat. She listened to Leo with a gentle, unwavering focus that made Rowan's chest ache. It was an ache she'd been feeling more and more. An ache that had little to do with Leo and everything to do with the way Marin's hand would sometimes brush against hers when passing the salt, or the way she'd ask Rowan about her art. Not her grades, but her art, with a genuine curiosity that Julia never managed. And then the boss level just totally annihilated me, Leo finished, grinning. Sounds brutal, sweetie, Marin said, smiling. She then turned that smile on Rowan. And how was your day, Rowan? Did you survive the pre-CLC midterm? Rowan felt a blush creep up her neck. It was okay. I think I messed up the last problem. I'm sure you did brilliantly, Marin said, her voice sincere. You're so much brighter than you give yourself credit for. The words were a balm. Simple. Kind. They sank into Rowan, warming her from the inside. She looked down at her plate, suddenly unable to meet Marin's gaze, terrified that the overwhelming, confusing surge of affection she felt would be written plainly on her face. Later, as Leo drove them back to his house to study, he said, Mom really likes you, you know. Rowan's heart did a funny little flip. I like her, too. No, I mean, she really likes you. She's always saying how good you are for me. How you're centering. He laughed. Her therapist talk is leaking again. Rowan stared out the window at the passing streetlights, her reflection a ghost over the dark city. You're so much brighter than you give yourself credit for. The words echoed, and a dangerous, thrilling thought began to form in the quiet corners of her mind. The war over Rowan's grade escalated. Julia went to the principal, Dr. Evans, a man who was terrified of the school's wealthy donors. He politely suggested Beatrice reconsider the exam. Beatrice, stubborn to a fault, refused. She spent her evenings compiling a meticulous defense, examples of Rowan's previous work, the school's own grading policy, academic papers on growth mindset. It was overkill, but it was principle. It was during one of these late-night sessions at the empty school that she ran into Julia again. Literally. Beatrice, bleary-eyed from staring at a spreadsheet, was carrying a towering stack of textbooks to her car. She pushed through the school's heavy front door and walked straight into someone. The books went flying. Papers scattered across the damp pavement. For God's sake, Julia's sharp intake of breath was followed by a stunned silence. Beatrice looked up. Julia was standing there, clutching a leather portfolio, her perfect hair slightly disheveled from the impact. She wasn't in a pantsuit. She was in dark jeans and a black cashmere sweater, a long coat draped over her arm. She looked softer. Human. I'm so sorry, Beatrice stammered, kneeling to gather the books. I wasn't looking. To her utter astonishment, Julia knelt beside her. Neither was I. She began gathering papers, her movements efficient. Her fingers brushed against Beatrice's as they both reached for a stray quiz. A jolt, sharp and electric, passed between them. They both froze. Their eyes met. In the dim glow of the security light, Beatrice saw something she'd never seen in Julia's face before. Not anger, not disdain, but a flicker of something raw and surprised. The same shock that was currently buzzing through Beatrice's own veins. Julia looked away first, her composure slamming back into place. Working late, Ms. Conti. Fending off board members, Mrs. Rossi, Beatrice retorted, but the usual heat was gone from her words. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Julia's lips. It transformed her face. Still fighting the good fight for that devastating B+. It's a hill I'm willing to die on. They stood up, the retrieved stack of books between them. The air was cold, but Beatrice felt strangely warm. You're very stubborn, Julia said. It didn't sound like an insult. You're very persistent, Beatrice replied. They stood there for a moment, in the quiet, empty parking lot, a truce hovering in the space between them. Julia's perfume was different tonight. Lighter. Just the faintest trace of the jasmine. Let me help you to your car, Julia said, her voice quieter than Beatrice had ever heard it. She did. She held the books while Beatrice unlocked her beat-up sedan. As Beatrice loaded them into the passenger seat, Julia said, You know, Rowan speaks very highly of you. The statement was so unexpected it stole Beatrice's breath. She does. She says you make math make sense. That you're the first teacher who hasn't made her feel stupid for asking questions. Beatrice turned to face her. Rowan is one of the most gifted students I've ever taught. She's intuitive. She doesn't just solve problems, she understands them. The grade, it wasn't a judgment on her ability. It was a reflection of one mistake on one day. Julia studied her face, her hazel eyes searching. Beatrice felt truly seen by her for the first time, and it was nothing like she'd imagined. It wasn't judgmental. It was curious. I see, Julia said softly. She took a step back, the moment breaking. Good night, Ms. Conti. Beatrice, she found herself saying. You can call me Beatrice. Another one of those faint, transformative smiles. Julia. Good night, Beatrice. She watched Julia walk to her own car, a sleek, silent luxury sedan that purred to life. Beatrice got into her own car, her hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. The scent of jasmine lingered in the cold air she'd let in. The following week, Dr. Evans called Beatrice into his office. He looked bemused. Well, it seems the Rossi matter has been resolved. Resolved? Julia Rossi just called. She said that upon further reflection, she has full confidence in your professional judgment and that she appreciates your commitment to academic integrity. Beatrice left his office in a daze. She didn't understand. The victory felt hollow, and yet, strangely exhilarating. A few days later, a small, elegant envelope appeared in her school mailbox. Inside was a card. The handwriting was bold and precise. Ms. Conti, Beatrice. I owe you an apology. My behavior was unbecoming. I allowed my own anxieties for Rowan's future to cloud my judgment. I attacked your professionalism, which is clearly beyond reproach. I hope we can start again. Sincerely, Julia Rossi. P.S. I am chairing a fundraiser for the New Arts Wing next Thursday evening. I would be pleased if you would attend as my guest. Beatrice read the note 3 times. An apology. An invitation. It was the last thing she ever expected from Julia Rossi. A part of her, the part that had been steamrolled by this woman for months, screamed that it was a trap. A power play. But the larger part of her, the part that had seen the raw surprise in Julia's eyes in the parking lot, that had heard the softness in her voice when she spoke of her daughter, was intensely, undeniably curious. She went. The fundraiser was held in a glittering hotel ballroom. Beatrice felt out of place in her simple black dress amidst a sea of designer gowns and cocktail rings. She spotted Julia immediately. She was holding court near the stage, wearing a dress of deep emerald green that made her skin glow. She was magnetic, laughing at something a donor was saying, her hand resting lightly on the man's arm. She was in her element. Then Julia's eyes scanned the crowd and found Beatrice. Her smile didn't fade, it changed. It became more specific. She excused herself and began moving through the crowd with a singular purpose. You came, Julia said, stopping before her. Her gaze swept over Beatrice, not critically, but appreciatively. You look beautiful. The compliment, so direct and unexpected, left Beatrice speechless for a moment. Thank you. So do you. This is quite an event. It's a necessary evil. Champagne. She plucked 2 flutes from a passing waiter and handed one to Beatrice. Their fingers touched again. The jolt was back. Beatrice took a hurried sip. I received your note, Beatrice said. Thank you. The apology wasn't necessary, but it was appreciated. It was necessary, Julia corrected gently. I was a bully. I don't like that version of myself. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping. And I have a feeling you wouldn't hesitate to call me on it again. You'd be right. Julia laughed, a real, unguarded sound that made several heads turn. I like that. I'm surrounded by sycophants, Beatrice. It's refreshing to meet someone who isn't impressed by me. I didn't say I wasn't impressed, Beatrice said, the champagne making her bold. I'm reassessing. Julia's eyes held hers, the gold flecks in them seeming to spark. I hope the reassessment is favorable. They were interrupted constantly throughout the evening. Donors, other board members, the mayor. But Julia always returned to Beatrice's side, weaving her into conversations, asking her opinion on the school's curriculum, listening intently to her answers. Beatrice found herself talking about her passion for teaching, her belief that math was a language of beauty and logic. Julia listened as if it were the most fascinating thing she'd ever heard. During a lull, as a jazz band started to play, Julia said, "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. It was a quiet command, wrapped in a hope so vulnerable Beatrice saw it flicker in her eyes. "People will talk," Beatrice said, her heart thundering. "The teacher and the board president." "Let them," Julia whispered. And then Julia's hand was in hers, the other resting on Beatrice's waist, guiding her to the edge of the dance floor. It wasn't a slow song, but they moved to it anyway, a private rhythm in the crowded room. Julia was a good dancer, confident and leading. Beatrice let herself be led. The scent of her, the warmth of her hand, the proximity of her body, it was dizzying. Beatrice's earlier disdain had melted away, replaced by a terrifying, thrilling attraction. "I don't understand this," Beatrice murmured, her cheek close to Julia's. "What?" "This. You and me. A week ago, I thought I hated you." Julia's hand tightened on her waist. "And now? Now I have no idea what I feel." Julia pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. The music, the crowd, the glittering lights, it all faded into a blur. There was only Julia's intense, searching gaze. "That," Julia said, her voice barely a whisper, "is a very good start." The song ended. They stood there for a moment, suspended in the space between what was and what could be. The spell was broken by the sound of clapping as the band took a bow. Julia reluctantly dropped her hands. "I should mingle. Duty calls." "Of course. Will you stay? Until the end?" Beatrice nodded, unable to form words. She did stay. And at the end of the night, as the staff began cleaning up, Julia found her again. "Can I give you a ride home?" "I have my car." "Then can I walk you to it?" They walked through the parking garage in silence, the click of Julia's heels echoing. When they reached Beatrice's car, the tension was a live wire between them. "Thank you for coming, Beatrice," Julia said. "It meant a great deal to me. Thank you for inviting me." They stood there. Beatrice knew she should get in the car. She should drive away. This was madness. Julia Rossi. A parent. A woman. "I want to kiss you," Julia said suddenly, bluntly. The confession hung in the cold garage air, shocking in its honesty. Beatrice's breath caught. Every rational thought screamed no. But her body, her traitorous, yearning body, leaned forward an inch. It was all the invitation Julia needed. She closed the distance between them, her hand cupping Beatrice's cheek, her thumb stroking her jawline. And then her lips were on Beatrice's. It was not a gentle, exploratory kiss. It was a claiming. A conflagration. It was months of heated arguments and mutual frustration transforming into a blinding, shocking heat. Julia's mouth was soft and demanding, and Beatrice kissed her back with a desperation she didn't know she possessed. Her hands came up to grip Julia's arms, holding on as the world fell away. The taste of champagne and Julia, the feel of her cashmere sweater under her fingers, the scent of jasmine and oud, now forever imprinted on her soul as the smell of desire. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. Julia rested her forehead against Beatrice's, her eyes closed. "Well," Beatrice breathed, her voice unsteady. "That certainly clarifies things." Julia laughed, a shaky, relieved sound. "For me, too." This was how it began. Not with a slow burn, but with a lightning strike. They were cautious at first. Secretive. Their worlds were too different, the stakes too high. They met for coffee in neighborhoods where they wouldn't be recognized. They went for drives, talking for hours parked overlooking the city lights. Beatrice learned about Julia's messy divorce, her fears of failing as a mother, the immense pressure she felt to maintain a perfect facade. Julia learned about Beatrice's large, loud, loving Italian family, her father's death that had led her to teaching for its stability, her quiet dream of writing a book on the philosophy of mathematics. The intellectual and emotional connection was profound. The physical one was incendiary. Every stolen touch, every secret kiss in Julia's pristine, empty house while Rowan was at Leo's, felt like a rebellion and a homecoming all at once. Beatrice was falling, hard and fast, for the woman she had sworn she hated. While her mother was falling in love, Rowan was falling into confusion. She found herself inventing reasons to go to Leo's house. A misplaced textbook. A group project. She'd show up and feel a pang of disappointment if Marin's car wasn't in the driveway. One afternoon, she arrived to find Leo wasn't home yet. Marin answered the door, dressed in paint-splattered jeans and an old t-shirt, her hair tied up in a messy knot. Rowan. Hi, sweetie. Leo's running late. Something with the car. Come in, come in. I'm just attempting to redecorate the guest room and failing miserably. Rowan followed her to the room, which was indeed a disaster of paint cans, drop cloths, and frustration. Marin had chosen a pale lavender color that had gone on streaky and looked nothing like the sample. Oh, it's a catastrophe, Marin groaned, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of paint. I have no idea what I'm doing. I like it, Rowan said softly. Marin turned to her, a wry smile on her face. You're a terrible liar. But thank you. She sighed. I just wanted it to feel peaceful. A sanctuary. Without thinking, Rowan said, Can I help? Marin's face lit up. Would you? I'm clearly in over my head. They spent the next hour together. Rowan, who had an artist's eye for color and technique, showed her how to cut in the edges neatly, how to roll the paint on evenly. They worked side by side, their arms brushing. They talked about everything and nothing. Marin told funny stories about Leo as a little boy. Rowan talked about her art, her dream of going to RISD instead of MIT, a dream she'd never voiced to her mother. You should, Marin said firmly, pausing with her roller mid-stroke. You should follow your passion, Rowan. Life is too short to live someone else's dream. The simple validation brought tears to Rowan's eyes. She turned away, pretending to focus on her painting. Hey, Marin said gently. She put down her roller and came over. She placed a hand on Rowan's arm, turning her around. Are you okay? Rowan looked into her sea-glass eyes, so full of concern and kindness, and the words tumbled out. I'm just scared. My mom, she has this whole plan for me. And it's not my plan. Then you have to tell her, Marin said softly. Her thumb stroked Rowan's arm, a comforting, absent-minded gesture that sent shivers through her. You have to be brave enough to be yourself. It's easy for you to say. You're the bravest person I know. Marin laughed, a surprised, melodic sound. Me. I'm a mess. I got divorced because I was too afraid to admit I was unhappy for 10 years. I picked the wrong paint colors. I burned toast. You're not a mess, Rowan whispered. You're perfect. The air in the room shifted. The words hung between them, too revealing, too heartfelt. Rowan's heart was pounding. Marin's hand stilled on her arm. Her eyes searched Rowan's face, and the gentle concern in them slowly shifted into something else, a dawning, startled recognition. They were standing very close. Rowan could see the faint dusting of freckles across Marin's nose, the tiny flecks of lavender paint on her cheek. She could feel the warmth of Marin's body. Rowan didn't know who moved first. Maybe they both did. But suddenly, the space between them was gone. Marin's other hand came up to cup Rowan's face, her touch impossibly gentle. And then Marin was kissing her. It was nothing like kissing Leo. It was soft, questioning, tender. It tasted of mint tea and the faint, sweet smell of paint. It was the most right, most terrifying thing Rowan had ever experienced. She kissed back, her hands coming to rest on Marin's waist, feeling the soft, worn cotton of her t-shirt. When they pulled apart, they were both shaking. Marin's eyes were wide with shock and fear. Rowan. Oh God. I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have. Don't be sorry, Rowan breathed, her voice trembling. Please. Don't be sorry. She leaned in and kissed Marin again, this time with more confidence. Marin made a small, helpless sound in the back of her throat and surrendered to it, her arms wrapping around Rowan, holding her close. The sound of a key in the front door made them spring apart. "Mom! Rowan! You here?" Leo's voice echoed through the house. They stared at each other, their faces flushed, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The spell was shattered, replaced by a chilling wave of reality. "In here!" Marin called out, her voice miraculously steady. She quickly wiped the paint off her face with a rag, her hands shaking. She wouldn't meet Rowan's eyes. Leo appeared in the doorway. "Whoa, look at this. You guys did a great job." "Rowan saved me," Marin said, still not looking at her. "She's a natural." The rest of the evening was a special kind of torture. Rowan had to sit with Leo, pretending to study, while her entire body hummed with the memory of the kiss. She could feel Marin's presence in the house like a magnetic pull. Every time their eyes accidentally met, a bolt of electricity passed between them, followed by a surge of guilt so powerful it made Rowan feel sick. She was in love with her boyfriend's mother. And from the stolen, anguished glances Marin gave her when Leo wasn't looking, she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that Marin felt it too. The secret, for both mother and daughter, had begun. A secret that would soon unravel and reweave itself into a new, impossible pattern. Part 2. The Unraveling. The art room was Rowan's sanctuary. The smell of turpentine, clay, and fixative was a welcome reprieve from the sterile scent of algebra and expectation. Here, surrounded by half-finished canvases and sculptures swathed in damp cloths, she could breathe. Today, however, the air felt thick with her secret. She was working on a portrait, her charcoal moving in quick, agitated strokes across the large sheet of paper. It wasn't a conscious decision. Her hand seemed to be moving of its own volition, guided by a memory so vivid it burned behind her eyes. She was sketching Marin. Not the Marin everyone saw, the pleasant, slightly scattered mom next door. She was drawing the Marin she had seen in the lavender-scented guest room, her hair escaping its knot, a smudge of paint on her cheek, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. She was capturing the curve of her smile, the gentle slope of her neck, the profound kindness that seemed to radiate from her. "That's incredible, Rowan." The voice, so familiar and yet now so loaded, made her jump. Her charcoal skidded, leaving a dark slash across the page. Julia stood in the doorway of the art room, her eyes fixed on the portrait. She was early to pick Rowan up for a dentist appointment. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through Rowan. She instinctively moved to cover the drawing, but it was too late. Her mother's sharp eyes had already taken it in, had already recognized the subject. It's just a practice piece," Rowan stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "A study in light and shadow." Julia walked closer, her heels silent on the linoleum. She stopped before the easel, her expression unreadable. She studied the drawing for a long, tense moment. The love and longing in every line were unmistakable. It was not the work of a casual observer. "You've captured her essence," Julia said finally, her voice oddly quiet. "The softness." There was no criticism in her tone, only a strange, pensive curiosity. Rowan couldn't speak. She felt exposed, flayed open. Julia turned her gaze from the portrait to her daughter. Her hazel eyes, so often filled with ambition and impatience, now held a new, unsettling depth. She looked at Rowan as if seeing her for the first time. "You spend a lot of time at Leo's house," she stated, not a question. Rowan nodded, mute. Is it Leo you're so drawn to?" Julia asked. The question was careful, deliberate. The directness shattered Rowan's composure. A tear escaped and traced a path through the charcoal dust on her cheek. She shook her head, a tiny, desperate movement. The truth hung in the air between them, silent and devastating. Julia's breath hitched. She looked back at the portrait of Marin, then at her daughter's tear-streaked face. A myriad of emotions flickered across her own features. Shock, confusion, dawning understanding, and then, to Rowan's utter astonishment, a flicker of something that looked like empathy. "Oh, Rowan," she whispered. She didn't sound angry. She sounded heartbroken. She opened her arms. It was an invitation Rowan hadn't received since she was a small child. With a sob, she fell into her mother's embrace, burying her face in the familiar, expensive wool of her coat. Julia held her tightly, her hand stroking her hair. "It's okay," Julia murmured, though her voice was thick with her own unshed tears. "It's going to be okay." They stood like that for a long time in the quiet art room, the portrait of Marin bearing witness to a bond that was, in that moment, reforged in the fire of a shared, impossible secret. That night, in the stark modernity of Julia's kitchen, they talked. Really talked. Rowan confessed everything: her feelings for Marin, the kiss, the crushing guilt, her terror. Julia listened, without interruption, without judgment. The formidable board president was gone, replaced by a mother whose primary concern was her child's pain. When Rowan finished, exhausted and raw, Julia took her hand. "This is complicated, darling. Profoundly complicated." "I know," Rowan whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Don't you dare apologize for who you love," Julia said, her voice fierce now. "Never that." She took a deep breath. "But we have to be careful. This involves Leo. It involves a lot of people." "What do I do?" Rowan pleaded. "You need to end things with Leo," Julia said gently. "It's not fair to him. You can't be with him when your heart is somewhere else entirely." The advice was shocking, coming from her mother. It was the opposite of the maintain appearances mantra she'd been raised with. "But how? What do I say?" "You tell him the truth," Julia said. "Not the whole truth, but a truth. That your feelings have changed. That it's not his fault. That he deserves someone who can love him completely." It was the hardest thing Rowan had ever done. Leo was heartbroken, confused, and angry. The fallout was messy. Their friend group fractured. For a while, Rowan was a pariah, the girl who'd callously dumped one of the most popular guys in school. Through it all, Julia was her unwavering support. She became her daughter's fiercest defender, her confidant. The constant battles over grades and futures ceased, replaced by a fragile, powerful alliance. It was during one of these late-night talks, fueled by chamomile tea and shared vulnerability, that Julia's own secret slipped out. They were talking about love, about how it can surprise you. "It doesn't always look the way you expect," Julia said, staring into her teacup. "Sometimes it comes wrapped in an argument." Rowan looked at her mother, really looked at her. She noticed the subtle change in her. She was less rigid, quicker to smile. She'd been spending more evenings out, claiming board meetings. But there was a new light in her eyes, a softness around her edges. "Mom?" Rowan asked, a suspicion forming. "Is there someone? Is that why you've been so understanding?" Julia looked up, caught. A blush, something Rowan had never seen on her mother's composed face, crept up her neck. She opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it. She looked at her daughter, at the shared understanding that now existed between them, and she took a leap of faith. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "There is someone." "Who is he?" Rowan asked. Julia took a deep breath. "It's not a he, Rowan." The words landed in the quiet kitchen with the force of a detonation. Rowan stared, her mind reeling, trying to process. "Not a he. It's Beatrice," Julia said, the name a confession and a relief. "Ms. Conti." Rowan's world tilted again. Her algebra teacher. The woman her mother had fought with for months. The woman she herself respected, even liked. The pieces snapped together, her mother's sudden change of heart about the grade, her newfound softness, the late nights. A strange, hysterical laugh bubbled up in Rowan's throat. It was too absurd. Too impossible. You're in love with my math teacher." "I think I am," Julia said, a wondering tone in her voice, as if hearing it for the first time herself. It's real, Rowan. It's messy and complicated and terrifying, and it's the most real thing I've felt in years." Instead of anger or disgust, Rowan felt an overwhelming wave of relief. They were in this together. They were both navigating the same terrifying, wonderful uncharted territory. Mother and daughter. Both in love with women who were, by any conventional measure, entirely off limits. Their secrets were no longer their own. They were now a shared burden, and a shared strength. The next step was inevitable. They had to tell Marin and Beatrice. The two couples arranged to meet, a clandestine dinner at a quiet restaurant far from their usual haunts. The atmosphere was thick with tension and awkwardness. Beatrice, usually so composed in her classroom, fumbled with her napkin. Marin couldn't seem to make eye contact with anyone. Julia, ever the CEO, tried to steer the conversation, but even her confidence seemed frayed. It was Rowan who finally broke the ice. She looked at Marin, her gaze steady despite the frantic beating of her heart. "We know this is a lot," she said, her voice clear. "And it's weird. And complicated. But we're not here to apologize for how we feel. We're here because what we feel is important. And we want to find a way to make it work. Together." Her courage seemed to unlock the others. Marin reached under the table and took Rowan's hand, lacing their fingers together. A silent tear traced down her cheek, but she was smiling. "She's right," Marin said, her voice soft but firm. She looked at Julia and Beatrice. "This is our reality. These are the people we love." Julia looked at Beatrice, a question in her eyes. Beatrice nodded, a slow, sure smile spreading across her face. Julia reached for her hand. Two couples, joined not just by love, but by a bond that defied every norm. A mother and daughter, and the two women they loved. The path ahead, they knew, would be fraught with challenges. But in that moment, holding the hands of the people they loved, surrounded by a fragile, newfound acceptance, they felt, for the first time, like a family. A very unconventional, messy, and beautiful family. The first cracks in their carefully constructed world appeared not as a quake, but as a whisper. It was Leo who inadvertently started it. Hurt and confused after his breakup with Rowan, he was complaining to a friend at a party. "I don't get it. She just changed. She's always over at my house, but it's like she's not even there for me. She and my mom are always whispering, painting together. It's weird." The friend, a gossipy girl named Chloe, latched onto it. "Weird how?" "I don't know. Just intense." Leo, sensing he'd said too much, tried to backtrack. "Forget it. It's nothing." But it was enough. Chloe, who had always been jealous of Rowan's quiet beauty and intelligence, began weaving a story. She mentioned the weird closeness between Rowan and Marin to another friend, who mentioned it to her mother, who played tennis with a woman who sat on the school board with Julia Rossi. The whispers snaked through their affluent community, finding fertile ground in the soil of suburban boredom and judgment. They were too rich, too different, the Rosses. Julia with her sharp elegance and uncompromising ways, and Rowan, the quiet, artistic daughter who had suddenly dumped the town's golden boy. The rumor mutated with each telling. It was no longer just about a strange friendship. It became sordid. An affair. People began to look at Marin and Rowan differently at the grocery store. Conversations would halt when Julia walked into a charity luncheon. The first overt homophobia was a scrawled note on Rowan's locker. Just one word, in ugly, block letters, DYKE. Rowan stared at it, her blood running cold. She scraped it off with trembling fingers, her heart pounding with a mixture of shame and fury. She didn't tell her mother. She didn't tell Marin. She carried the word with her like a shard of ice in her chest. For Julia and Beatrice, it was more subtle. A concerned email from the principal, Dr. Evans, suggesting that perhaps, for the sake of professional optics, Ms. Conti might consider being less conspicuous in her friendship with Mrs. Rossi. A donor at a school event pointedly asking Julia if her close relationship with the math teacher was influencing curriculum decisions. Then came the anonymous letter to Julia's house. It was typed, vicious. "Everyone knows what you are. A disgrace. A pervert corrupting a young teacher and letting your daughter run wild. You're unfit to be on the school board. You're unfit to be a mother. Leave our town before you're forced out." Julia read it standing in her pristine kitchen, her hand shaking so badly the paper rattled. The words weren't just hateful, they were a direct attack on the two things she held most dear, her position in the community and her role as a mother. A cold fear, one she hadn't felt since her divorce, gripped her. Beatrice found her there, pale and silent, the letter on the counter between them. Beatrice read it, her face hardening with each word. "We can't let them see that this gets to us," Beatrice said, her voice low and steady. She took Julia's icy hands in her own. "This is ignorance. This is fear. We can't fight it by hiding." "They're talking about my fitness as a mother," Julia whispered, her voice breaking. People could try to take Rowan from me." "They won't," Beatrice said fiercely. "We won't let them." But the fear was a seed, and it had been planted. The final, public blow came at the annual school board meeting. It was normally a dull affair, but the auditorium was packed. Julia, as chair, was running the meeting with her usual clipped efficiency, but the tension in the room was palpable. A man stood up during the public comment period. He was the father of one of Rowan's former friends. "I have a question about moral standards," he began, his voice loud and pompous. "Specifically, the moral standards of those who lead this district and shape our children." A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to Julia. "We teach our children about family values," the man continued. "But what are we to think when those in charge openly flaunt relationships that are unnatural? When a board president is engaged in a deviant relationship with a teacher and allows her minor daughter to pursue a similar path with a divorcee?" The words hung in the air, ugly and direct. The room erupted in a mixture of gasps and murmurs. Julia sat frozen at the dais, her face a mask of white fury. Beatrice, sitting in the audience, felt her own anger ignite. She stood up. "That's enough," Beatrice's voice, her teacher voice, clear and authoritative, cut through the noise. "You will not speak about people's private lives in that manner. This is a school board meeting, not a witch hunt." The man turned on her. "And you're the teacher. You should be ashamed. Preying on a vulnerable woman." "I am not vulnerable," Julia's voice rang out, cold and sharp as steel. She stood up, her posture ramrod straight. Every ounce of her formidable power was focused on the man. "And you will not speak to her that way. My relationship with Ms. Conti is a private matter between two consenting adults. My daughter's life is her own. Your bigotry has no place here." It was a magnificent performance. But as she spoke, Julia could see the faces in the crowd. Some were supportive, nodding. But many were shut down, hostile, disgusted. She saw the future in their eyes, the whispered campaigns, the withdrawn donations, the social exile. They had faced the monster, and they had stood their ground. But they had also seen its true size. After the meeting, the four of them gathered at Julia's house, a council of war. The bravado of the public confrontation had faded, replaced by a somber reality. "We can't stay here," Marin said quietly, voicing the thought they had all been avoiding. She held Rowan's hand tightly. "This town, it will eat us alive. It will poison everything." "Where would we go?" Rowan asked, her voice small. "Somewhere we can breathe," Beatrice said. "Somewhere we can just be." It was Julia who made the decision. She looked around the room at the three people she loved most in the world: her brilliant, brave daughter, the gentle, strong woman her daughter loved, and the passionate, stubborn woman who had unlocked her own heart. She thought of the anonymous letter, the word on Rowan's locker, the hatred in that man's eyes. She would not let them be diminished. She would not let their love be defined by small-mindedness. "We'll leave," Julia declared, her CEO voice back, but now used to protect her family, not her portfolio. "We'll go somewhere new. Together. We'll build a life where we don't have to be a secret. Where we can be a family." It was a terrifying prospect. Leaving their jobs, their home, their known world. But the alternative, a life of hiding and fear, was worse. The planning began in earnest. They chose a smaller, more progressive city a few hours away. Beatrice applied for and got a teaching job at a new school. Julia, leveraging her contacts, began consulting remotely. Marin, an accomplished graphic designer, could work from anywhere. Rowan applied to the local art school, her dream finally within reach, free from the shadow of MIT. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of packing and goodbyes. They sold Julia's imposing modern house and found an older, sprawling home with a garden for Marin to putter in and a sunroom Rowan could use as a studio. It needed work, but it felt like a promise. On their last day in town, they took one final drive. They passed the high school, the country club, the streets where they had learned to love and learned to be afraid. As they reached the city limits, a collective sigh of relief passed through the car. They were leaving behind the whispers and the hate. They were driving toward their future. It wasn't a retreat. It was a strategic advance to a new battlefield, one where they could finally win the right to be themselves. The new city was a balm. Nobody knew them. Nobody stared. They were just four women moving into a house on Elm Street. They were the talk of the neighborhood for a week, but only because of the sheer volume of IKEA boxes they carried in, not because of their relationships. They painted walls together, argued over tile samples, and got lost in the new grocery store. The mundane acts of building a home became acts of healing. The fear that had been a constant hum in the background began to recede, replaced by a tentative, growing sense of safety. It was in this new environment, free from the weight of judgment, that their relationships deepened and their family bond solidified. They were no longer two separate couples living in parallel. They became a unit. Julia and Marin, once connected only through their children, discovered a shared love for old films and terrible wine. Beatrice and Rowan, once teacher and student, found a new dynamic, debating art and philosophy as equals. The four of them would spend evenings on the big porch, talking and laughing, the sound a testament to their hard-won peace. One such evening, as fireflies blinked in the gathering dusk, Rowan was curled up against Marin on the porch swing. Julia and Beatrice were on the steps, Beatrice's head resting on Julia's shoulder. "It feels like a dream sometimes," Rowan said softly. "To just be able to, this." She gestured to the four of them, together, in the open. "It's not a dream," Marin said, kissing her forehead. "It's our life." "I want to make it more permanent," Julia said suddenly. She sat up straighter, turning to look at Beatrice, then at Rowan and Marin. "I don't want to just be living together. I want us to be a family. Officially." Beatrice's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to marry you, Beatrice Conti," Julia said, her eyes shining in the twilight. "If you'll have me." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. Julia then turned to the swing. "And you too. I see the way you look at each other. It's the real thing. I want to see you make that commitment. I want to be there when you do." Rowan looked at Marin, her heart in her throat. The question was in her eyes. Marin smiled, a beautiful, radiant smile. "Are you asking me to marry you, Rowan Rossi?" "I am," Rowan said, her voice strong and sure. "Will you?" Marin pulled her into a deep, loving kiss. "Yes." They decided on a double wedding. It was unconventional, joyous, and utterly them. They held it in their own backyard, under a canopy of fairy lights and blooming jasmine, a nod to the scent that had started it all for Julia and Beatrice. They wrote their own vows. Julia promised Beatrice to argue with her passionately and love her even more passionately. Beatrice promised Julia to always challenge her and always be her safe harbor. Rowan promised Marin to paint her 1,000 portraits and love her for 1,000 lifetimes. Marin promised Rowan to always make a sanctuary for her heart. They exchanged simple silver bands. There was no giving away, no separation. They stood together, a circle of four, and declared themselves a family. The challenge of marriage was soon followed by the deepest desire, to become mothers. They wanted a child, a baby who would be born into their love, who would know from his first breath that family is defined by love, not convention. The decision of who would carry the child was an easy one. Rowan was young, healthy, and fiercely wanted the experience. They chose a sperm donor together, poring over profiles not for IQ scores or athletic prowess, but for kindness, for a love of art and learning, for a smile that looked like it could hold joy. The pregnancy was a celebration. They attended every appointment together, a trio of excited mothers-to-be. They turned the smallest room in the house into a nursery, painting murals of swirling galaxies and storybook characters. The birth was a long, intense labor. Julia and Beatrice never left Rowan's side, holding her hands, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement. Marin, who had given birth to Leo, was their calm anchor, guiding Rowan through each wave of pain. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, the world narrowed to the tiny, perfect boy the midwife placed on Rowan's chest. Tears streamed down all their faces. They crowded around the bed, their hands overlapping on the new life they had created together. "Welcome, little one," Julia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to our family." They named him Leo, a name that meant lion, for strength and courage, and a quiet, private tribute to the boy who had been the unwitting catalyst for it all, a wish for peace and connection to the past. Baby Leo was surrounded by more love than any child could possibly need. He had a mother who had carried him, Rowan, a grandmother who was his fiercest protector, Julia, a mother who sang him silly songs in Italian, Beatrice, and a mother who rocked him for hours, telling him stories about the stars, Marin. Their family was complete. It was messy, complicated, and built on a foundation of struggle and immense courage. It was not a storybook family. It was better. It was real. One afternoon, a few years later, Leo was playing in the sandbox in their backyard. Julia and Beatrice were sipping iced tea on the porch, watching him. Marin and Rowan were weeding the flower beds, their heads close together. A new neighbor, an older woman, stopped by the fence. She'd seen the 4 women coming and going, had seen them with the little boy. "What a beautiful family," the woman said kindly to Julia. "That's your grandson. He looks just like you." Julia smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She looked at Beatrice, then at Rowan and Marin, then at her grandson, whose laughter echoed in the sunny yard. "Yes," she said, her voice full of love and certainty. "He's my grandson. And these are my wives. And that's my daughter. And we are a family." It was the truth. Their truth. Forged in fire, built on love, and finally, at peace.